Welcome to today's Explainer. We're actually going to do something a little bit different today. I want you to just imagine pulling up a seat by a crackling fire way out in the absolute freezing cold of the Ice Age. Think of this as a primal story kind of told from the perspective of our early ancestors. We're going to look at how our species managed to survive some of the harshest conditions literally imaginable, all because of an incredibly unlikely alliance. It is, at its core, the story of the very first good boy.
So the big question, how exactly did our greatest enemy become our best friend? I mean, today, dogs are just wonderfully ordinary, right? Think about it. A harmless, totally ordinary modern dog sleeping peacefully at the end of your bed in a nice little patch of sun. It's just the least surprising thing in the world. But here's the thing. Before that dog, there were absolutely no dogs on Earth. None. Zero. There were only wolves. And in that terrifying reality, wolves were literally the monsters waiting just outside the firelight. So how on earth did something that actively wanted to eat us become something that excitedly waits by the door for us?
Let's dive into Section 1, Rivals in the Ice Age.
Okay, to really understand why this whole friendship is essentially a miracle, you have to realize what we were actually up against back in the ancient world. The physical mismatch here was, well, it was terrifying. We were fierce competitors, humans and wolves. We were fighting for the exact same meat in this freezing, brutal world where large prey was rapidly dying out. Let me be clear, we were definitely not friends. The wolves of the Ice Age were massive. We're talking jaws that could crush solid bone, terrifying endurance, highly coordinated pack hunting strategies, and night vision that just completely outclassed ours. And humans? Well, we were slow, relatively weak, and honestly, entirely vulnerable. Put an early human in a one-on-one fight with an Ice Age wolf, and the wolf is going to win that fight every single time.
For us humans, life was just this brutal nomadic existence. You'd have these small bands of maybe 20 to 50 people, and they were constantly moving across these enormous, totally freezing landscapes. The winter cold was a constant killer. Something as simple as a broken leg, that could easily mean a death sentence. And honestly, most of our hunts actually failed. So we were highly vulnerable, always on the move, and always, and I mean always being watched by those massive predators just lingering right at the edge of the darkness.
Which brings us to Section 2, the trash heap theory. Now, you might be thinking this is going to be some romantic story where a human and a wolf, lock eyes across a snowy clearing and suddenly become best friends. But no, actually. We didn't purposely invent dogs. Not at all. No ancient human ever sat down and said, hey, I'm going to make a fluffy animal that plays fetch with me. We actually created them totally by accident. And it all comes down to this really fascinating concept called self-domestication. See, back then, we were incredibly messy eaters. We would eat the best parts of a hunted carcass and just leave behind the bones, the scraps, the skins. We weren't politely burying our trash, we just kind of dropped it and moved on. So to a starving wolf, a human camp was basically a giant moving pile of free calories. Now, most wolves were absolutely terrified of our fire and our spears, so they kept their distance. But the bold ones, the slightly curious, maybe a little less fearful wolves, they started creeping in to eat our garbage. And because they got those easy calories, they survived way better than the hyper-aggressive wolves that either fought us and got speared or just stayed far away and starved.
So this whole process happened completely silently over thousands of generations. It basically went like this. Step 1, the bold wolves eat our scraps. Step 2, those friendlier, calmer wolves survive longer and crucially, they breed with each other. And then step 3, and honestly this is the truly wild part, their physical traits actually started to change as their personalities softened. Evolution was just slowly filtering these wolves based entirely on their personality. It was literally turning aggression into calmness, right beside our campfires without us even realizing it was happening.
Now, if this physical transformation sounds a little bit like a myth to you, modern science has actually proven it. Back in 1959, there's the Soviet geneticist named Dmitry Belyaev, and he ran an experiment over in Siberia using wild foxes. What he did was simple. He just took the least aggressive foxes and bred them together. That is literally it. No training, no special tricks. And within just a few decades, not only did these foxes start, wagging their tails and whining for human attention, but their actual bodies physically changed. Their ears got floppy, their snouts got shorter, their tails started to curl. It turns out breeding purely for tameness automatically changes physical appearance. And that exact same thing happened to those Ice Age wolves.
All right, moving on to Section 3, a pact of shared survival.
So picture this. Now we have these smaller, calmer, honestly slightly weird-looking wolves just kind of hanging around our camps. They aren't fully wild anymore, but they definitely aren't house pets either. But here's the game changer. Without them, our survival was this brutal, exhausting, everyday struggle. But with them, our odds absolutely skyrocketed.
These proto-dogs had vastly superior hearing and smell compared to us, so they basically acted as living, breathing alarm systems. If a massive bear or a hostile stranger started approaching the camp, the dogs reacted first. Because of them, literally for the first time in human history, an entire camp could actually close their eyes at night and truly sleep safely.
And the mutual benefits really just kept growing from there. Having dogs allowed us to hunt dangerous prey much more safely because they could track and run down animals while we kind of hung back and waited for the right moment. Later on, as we eventually invented farming, dogs actually adapted right alongside us. They literally evolved the ability to digest starchy farm grains. But perhaps the most amazing part of all this is the deep chemical bonds that formed. Think about this. When you stare into a dog's eyes today, both of your brains release oxytocin. That's the exact same hormone involved in the bonding between human parents and their children. Wolves absolutely do not do this with humans. Over time, evolution physically wired our brains together. This incredible pact of shared survival is a massive part of what allowed humanity to spread successfully across the entire globe.
Now for Section 4, the Bond Oberkassel grave.
I want to just slow down the pace for a moment here, because we've really reached the emotional climax of our ancestral tale. There's this specific 14,000-year-old grave over in Germany where archaeologists made an incredible discovery. Inside, they found a dog. It was young, maybe 7 months old, so essentially just a puppy, and it was very, very sick. By studying its bones and teeth, scientists actually figured out it had a really severe case of distemper. Now, this illness would have made the puppy shake, run high fevers, and made it completely unable to hunt, pull things, or guard the camp. In pure cold survival terms, it was entirely useless to a nomadic hunter-gatherer tribe. Yet the evidence shows it survived for weeks, maybe even months, with this disease. And why? Because we humans spent our precious food, our time, and our energy hand-nursing it.
As one researcher so profoundly put it, that is not just usefulness anymore, that is attachment. I mean, wow. We didn't nurse that sick little puppy because it somehow earned its keep. We nursed it because we loved it. And when it finally died, our ancestors didn't just toss it aside or leave it behind. They buried it, so carefully, right between a man and a woman. They placed the dog exactly where it belonged, with its people. This single grave proves the definitive shift from a simple pact of utility to true, genuine love.
And that brings us to our final section, Section 5, the shadow of the wolf.
So let's step out of the freezing ice age for a second and come right back to the present day. Obviously, we've bred dogs into all sorts of crazy shapes and sizes now, right? Some are literally the size of a loaf of bread, and some, unfortunately, even struggle to breathe because of their little shortened snouts. But despite all of that human meddling, all that breeding, the echoes of that ancient pact still exist. You can actually see it in their everyday behavior. When your dog walks in a circle 3 or 4 times on the living room carpet before finally lying down, they are copying ancient wolves flattening tall grass. When they're twitching in their sleep, or when they suddenly tilt their head back and howl at an ambulance siren in the middle of the night, those are wild instincts from thousands of years ago. The shadow of an Ice Age predator is literally still surfacing inside every tiny chihuahua and every fluffy husky. Just think about the sheer scale of what this little accident of evolution actually achieved. 900 million. There are an estimated 900 million dogs on Earth today. They guard our homes, they herd our sheep, they detect danger, and they sleep right at the foot of our beds. And every single one of them exists because, tens of thousands of years ago, a few extremely cautious wolves just decided to creep a little bit closer to a human fire to eat some leftover scraps.
So I want to leave you with a lingering thought today. Can you see the shadow of the Ice Age predator in your best friend? Because the next time you look at a dog, whether it's frantically chasing a tennis ball at the park or just sleeping peacefully in a nice patch of sun, I want you to remember that ancient campfire. Remember those freezing Ice Age hunters, those terrifying wolves, and that miraculous 14,000-year-old friendship that quite literally changed the history of our entire species forever. Go give your dog a scratch behind the ears for me, would you? Thanks so much for joining me on This Explainer, and as always, keep learning.